Hello everybody, welcome back to Beyond the Veil Tarot and Astrology. My name is Candice Marie. Thank you for joining me. I'm your astrologer today. Stoked to be back. I know I've been saying I'm going to do this for a while, but here it is. This is part 2 that I am doing of the US Pluto return. Those of you guys who have not already seen my video, do check it out. I'll make sure we put a link in the description so you can kind of go and see what I was talking about when we first started shooting this. Personally, I don't even remember when it was. I want to say it was like summer of 2021. But it was quite some time ago that I put that video out because I could just see with some of the transits that were coming at the end of 2021, the retrogrades, the eclipses, that change was on the way. I'm sure you don't have to be an astrologer to know that the US has definitely been going through some changes really since like the Pluto-Uranus squares that we were experiencing when Uranus was in Aries. So it's been going on for what, 2016, 17, 18? It's been a while. Anyways, so this is part 2. So I'm not going to, I think, harp too much on stuff that we already spoke about, but I will do a little bit of a recap. And I do just want to kind of go over what's happened in recent weeks with this Venus retrograde that we've had in Capricorn conjunct Pluto. It's been conjunct America's Pluto in the second house. Also kind of seasoned with a little bit of the Mercury retrograde. Actually, as I'm filming this, Mercury is now direct, yay! But it's still conjunct Pluto. So I wanted to get this out because yes, we're gonna have the return this month. Does that mean something actually happens that day? I don't know, we'll have to find out. Usually we're gonna see, especially with outer planets, it's gonna take like a new moon, a full moon, you know, a lunar transit to activate some stuff. So we'll take a look at what the chart is saying. As always, I'm using the July 4th, 1776 at 5:10 p.m. in Philadelphia for the 4th of July chart. That's the chart that I use, is the Simply chart. So just going ahead and looking at the transits for the now clock. So we are February 9th, 2022. Oh my goodness, it's 2022. Just a little bit of like some insight I think that I've been noticing, and I'm excited to do some different things in this video today, some stuff that I didn't get the chance to do last time. We're not going to harp too much on transits. We're really going to look at return charts. And I'm going to show you how I kind of like nerd out when I'm comparing solar returns or progressions or anything like that to a natal chart, because you can see a lot of conjunctions and things that overlap, which will bring up very prominent themes for prediction in the year ahead. All right. So on the US Pluto return, so if you take a look at the inner wheel, America has Pluto retrograde at 27 degrees and 33 of Capricorn. So it's in the second house. It's in Capricorn. We're having our very first Pluto return as a country. It's taking us back to some of the same transits, at least when it comes to Pluto, on how this country was founded. So when I think about the second house, I think about resources, food, land, environment. I think about banking because it's a Taurus realm, very Venusian, it's earthy, it's the second house, which represents simplifying things, what we have in hand, whether that's what's in our cabinets, what's in our bank account, what money we physically have and can touch, all of that kind of Taurian things. And it's in the sign of Capricorn, which is about business, budgeting, in this case, government spending, resources, corporate America, big business, right? Because this is big. Capricorn is what governs everything. And then we've got Pluto that's returning to its natal placement, which rules over taxes, wealth, changes, power struggles, death, and or sometimes destruction. Think like rising through the ashes, right? Very kind of Pluto theme of everything kind of burns down. It has to kind of die off, regenerate, and then it comes back stronger. So, you know, we can only look at how other countries have experienced Pluto returns. I know I've seen Spain's chart. I know I've seen several of Britain's Pluto return charts, and each one's going to be different because it's going to be about how they were founded. So we're really kind of focusing on Pluto coming back to America's second house and what that means in regards to what's changing and transforming in regards to our value system. But remember, at least from my perspective, house trumps sign. So if we look at it like that, the second house definitely is about money, banking, resources, food, security, peppered with Pluto, which is not going to give you a lot of control, or it's going to manipulate or abuse power, especially in the sign of Capricorn. And it's not that really sweet, warm Venusian feeling. It's like Capricorn is steel. So something about Pluto going through that second house is kind of icy, it's cold, it's detached, it's matter of fact, right? And I think that there's going to be some really hard conversations that are going to be had at dinner tables across America for the next year or so, especially when it comes to decisions, bills, legislation that's going to be passed revolving around Pluto-related topics. So just some themes that come to mind for me personally, since seeing what's happened, right? The Saturn-Uranus squares all year have materialized as us having limitation of issues with the supply chain and goods with the supply chain. We've seen delays because of everything from, truckers that are wanting to protest, to weather issues, to supply issues, because it's been about 2 years now of us being in a pandemic, so we're not able to get certain things that we need, right? We think of like car parts, computer parts, certain things that are out of stock. And I definitely have some concerns revolving around Pluto in the second house. Is like, is there mass buying? Is there mass control over products? Are we losing our privacy when it comes to what the government is actually selling in regards to our privacy rights when it comes to transactions? This last year, we have found out about the new tax laws that are taking in effect in 2022. And now, the IRS is going to be digging and looking at transactions over $600 that might be in a Venmo account, or might be going through like PayPal, or anything that's going to be like a transaction account. So we're losing our privacy to an extent. And they're digging deeper into taxpayers kind of transactions. Haven't really heard too much. I know there's building momentum right now for like pushing and making huge changes revolving around, who some of our political figures are and what they're doing with their money, especially when it comes to making rules about regulations of things or actual trades, financial trades. Are there inside deals going on? How deep does lobbying go when it comes to paying things off? So this is just me just kind of wrapping more so on the astrology. And something that came to mind that was just like, I was like, I have to put this, is like the laws get crazier right before the empire falls. Like that's something that kept coming up for me. That's like, we may see some really, really bizarre stuff that starts coming up that gets people very enraged about how much control we have over our spending, our money, our resources, especially government supported stuff. So I think of like WIC programs, how they're actually helping veterans, how they're helping the homeless, how they are or not participating in helping us kind of work towards the goal of like getting a better healthcare system. Taurus definitely ruled by Venus. Venus has associations with health, but more in a sense of healthy food. Do we have healthy, clean environment? Do we have clean soil? Do we know what's actually being put into the soil or being used on our agricultural products, that kind of stuff? And Taurus is the body, right? That second house is very earthy and very much physically about the body. So it's the control. So I think we're going to hear a lot of stuff revolving around sexual reproductive rights, everything revolving around the Roe versus Wade stuff, and just anything in regards to how much control the government has over our body. I mean, this has really been going on for the last year, whether it's about, the VAX word, if it's about mandates, if it's about masks, if it's about whether or not we are actually given the freedom to go places, to eat places, things like that. So number one, like I said, the laws are going to get crazier right before the empire falls. Number two is my concern is the debt ceiling. Now, something that I did talk a lot about that I had concerns about in the last video was issues with inflation. Clearly, we're seeing that happen. I have some concerns revolving around what's going to be done about that, whether or not they're going to continue to keep making changes on a federal level, if they're going to rise interest rates, if they're going to drop it down. Obviously, they don't want to spook people with some of the stuff that's going on. Now, I think back to when America had, in the 1930s, its Pluto opposition. And certainly like going into the 30s, we saw, kind of a major economic decline, all kinds of issues, not just revolving around the markets, but also around rationing and anything relating to products that we can get. I also think about the Dust Bowl and everything that happened agriculturally, that we had certain areas of the country that was completely dry. It was tapped out. We did not have the ability to produce as much agriculturally. And we saw lots of people borderline, homeless, starving, not really having what they need. So if that's kind of the indication of the opposition, ironically, that's also when Pluto went into America's 8th house. It was conjunct our Mercury. We started putting so much emphasis on the American dream, building a business, going into debt, buying houses, having kids, all that kind of Mercury, Cancer, 12th house stuff. Now, after what's been half of a Pluto return, here we are now. And I'm saying this for many people. There's a lot of people out there who are like, I'm drowning in student debt. I don't know how I'm ever going to be able to pay this off, let alone be able to move out of a 1-bedroom apartment. Lots of millennials and people who are even older living at home or trying to figure out how to make ends meet, working jobs that they may be way overqualified for. So this kind of leans into not just issues with inflation, but I'm starting to wonder, are they actually going to do something about the student loan stuff? Is there going to be loan forgiveness? Does that make sense? Everybody has their own opinion. I mean, for me personally, it's something I've done, the last 2 years, really going down the rabbit hole, looking at why college was really pushed the way that it was pushed, especially in the 1960s going into the 1970s. You hear a lot of people who are like the boomers that are like, when I was your age, I saved money and I bought a car and I had a house and this and that. But yeah, also inflation, and we've seen that prices of goods have gone up. We have not seen that kind of match and also level with increases in salaries. Depending on where you're living, obviously it's going to vary, but my concern is that when we look at where it was back then and the fact that we were really pushing education, was this a scam? Okay, and I'm not against education, but was this a scam trying to push people going to school, going into debt, taking out these loans because they were told, well, you want to have the good job, you want to have the home, you want to have the car, the family. So really for the better part of the last 50 years, we've been pushing this idea that you have to just keep having more excess. Very much Pluto in the 2nd house. Anybody who has Pluto in the 2nd house, you can definitely tell a mile away because they'll put a huge value on things. They may be a collector of things. They may be somebody who wants a mass amount of things. They want to control things. Prized possessions, right? As I say this to you, I have 4 planets. 4 planets in my 2nd house. If you saw my office, it's all of my things, all of my books, Mercury 2nd house, all of my collectibles, all of my herbs, all of my things, right? So Pluto 2nd house is, especially in Capricorn, it's going to be what the government has control over that you own and what they can and cannot tax. So kind of skipping around a little bit, maybe it's just me being my kind of libertarian self, but we live in a world right now where there's in some places city tax, there's state tax, there's federal tax. We're paying taxes and we're also paying taxes on our income. What the fuck is going on? Ultimately the system is going to kind of break down. We've got billions of dollars that goes unaccounted for every year that we don't know where it's going to. It's going to, who knows? Out to outer space or out to, weapons for war. It's hard to say, but I think that ultimately the Pluto return is going to bring up this theme of the debt ceiling, whether or not we have, really hit that, or if we're going to finally kind of buckle down and do something about that. This is going to be where that bubble pops. Obviously, ongoing inflation issues and government rationing potentially of goods or materials, right? I also think about the control revolving around management of agriculture, because the second house deals very prominently with food, specifically because it's a Taurus house. It could be meat. Something that I've had a feeling that might actually materialize as a result of this is that we may actually start seeing environmental taxes that are coming. Things like, paying an environmental tax or carbon taxes. This is actually happening in some places. Perhaps maybe a new tax that's going to be coming on meat is kind of what I'm wondering, or leather goods or anything like that. And the management of agriculture, and whether or not we are going to be allowed to own masses of land. If there is a limit to that, or if they're going to make it more difficult for us to actually own land, especially if there is an emphasis in people wanting to become more self-sufficient in growing their own food or developing their own agricultural stuff to be more independent. So I have concerns that the Pluto return is going to bring up some of this stuff. Now, when it comes to agriculture, because Pluto is toxins and hazardous materials, I wonder if this is going to be scandals revolving around the government getting involved, massive grow operations of food, because they're trying to kind of get involved with more managing, what we can and cannot buy and what things cost. Remember, where the North Node is, guys, prices go up. So what we're going to see here is with the North Node in Taurus, prices are going to continue rising when it comes to money, when it comes to anything like taxes, when it comes to land, certain agricultural goods. Like, we're going to see that rise. That's not going to be something that's going to change anytime soon. Currently, the North Node is in a trine to Pluto. So we're also seeing that just going to the grocery store, taking a look at some of the shelves, what things are costing, things aren't really making sense. We're starting to see that, prices are going up on a bag of apples or a loaf of bread or anything like that. But I think we're actually going to see more, especially as we get into the spring. Something else is that I had concerns about is just, like I said, what's in the ground, and also like fertilizers and what fertilizers are being used, or what toxins or pesticides are being used, especially if we do ultimately end up seeing some kind of more government involvement in the growth of food, produce, anything like that. And because they're trying to mass grow, or because they're trying to do it in a very cheap or an efficient way, that we actually find out that they're using kind of like toxic materials in order to just kind of push everything through, right? I'm hoping that the Pluto return brings us new opportunities and new working conditions and a new standard of work. Some things that have come up just in recent months, I think about the tornado that we had, where all of those Amazon employees got stuck and unfortunately either got hurt or lost their lives because they were unable to use their phone or technology while they were in the building. We're also seeing all kinds of stuff about workers of larger companies being overworked and underpaid. We've also seen all kinds of issues with people who have completely lost their job as a result of COVID, just because of what changes have happened economically, and they don't have the ability to go back to a job. So new working conditions, a new standard of work. We have probably more self-employed people now than we ever have before in this workforce, and that's really what America kind of was founded on, right? At least independence, in a sense of being able to buy into the American dream. You come here, you have the opportunity, everybody is created equal. It doesn't matter your upbringing, your social class, what have you. Like, the Statue of Liberty says very specifically, like, bring me your poor and everybody who doesn't have a home. So we're kind of in a situation now where after 2 or 3 years of really getting our asses kicked economically, now we're in a situation where many people have had to learn to be very resourceful. That's the good thing about Pluto in the second house. Especially at a 27, this particular Pluto deals with like a Gemini energy. So it's things like working on computers, anything related to technology, anything related to communications, cell phones, apps, online stores and businesses, marketing, merchants, right? So I'm wondering if there's going to be changes, because obviously, self-employment tax is super killer. There's no secret that America really does kind of hook up those larger companies and gives them all kinds of tax breaks and opportunities for not only big business, but the billionaires out there that are doing nothing but just raking in the money while they're paying people pretty much like dollars, pennies on the dollar to do work. So kind of backing it up a little bit, I'm hoping that there's going to be some personal income changes that are positive. Obviously, we've had stimuluses, we've had all kinds of other economic declines, there's other packages and things that have kind of gone out, but that comes from somewhere. There's always a catch. Money is not free in this country. You guys may have gotten your stimulus checks, but you are going to find in the months ahead that because of legislation and things that are passed to kind of cover that or make up for that, I think we're actually going to find that we're paying more money in taxes. It's still super messy, and we don't really know where the money is going. Especially if you look at education in the United States, at least public education, or if you're looking at what's going on with the roadways or even the healthcare, where is our money going? Now, a Pluto return is going to put us in a situation where we are no longer just going to go, oh yeah, it's fine, don't worry about it. We'll just put a patch on it, or we're going to put a Band-Aid on a broken arm. It will fundamentally break. That's what is meant to happen here. So we're going to talk about that breaking. There will be actually 3 Pluto returns that's happening. People hear one Pluto return and they're like, oh, it happens and we're done, like it's a birthday. No. There's going to be several Pluto returns, so we're going to talk about it because we've got this one that's going to be happening in February. We've got another one that's going to happen over the summer, and then we're going to have when it goes direct and it hits again, I believe, in December. So yeah, I'm hoping that, you know, there's going to be positive tax changes where we're actually wanting to create some incentive for those who are self-employed or starting their own businesses or growing their own businesses, rather than seeing kind of the breakdown of the mom and pop shops and other things, because there's so many tax breaks and so many hookups that are going on for the larger companies. So do expect new tax laws. So let's go ahead and get into the charts and take a look at that. I want to start first with just talking about the current transits. And I want to talk about this past Venus and Mercury retrograde. I know I harped on it a lot, guys, but you know, it's pretty damn important. We saw Mercury go retrograde and conjunct with America's Pluto several times. Now, in America's chart, Mercury rules the 7th house, which deals very specifically with our relationships with other people, what's out there, perhaps in Gemini, what's out in the media. So certainly there's been lots of talk and conversations about what is happening economically in the United States. That's no surprise. The fact that it has been making a trine to America's Neptune in the midst of this, Neptune in Virgo, which is located in the natal 9th house, makes me feel like there has been this either sense of like illusion or smoothing over or being like, no, it's fine, it's going to be okay. You know, this is what our analysts are telling us, or this is what's going to go on. This is how we're going to handle it. So the Mercury in Capricorn is super, it's very fact driven. It's very much about details, and it's also about kind of the bottom line and kind of getting through things. I don't know about you, but just seeing what's gone on economically in this country, and then also looking at what's been happening, at least in the markets, it's like it couldn't be more opposite, right? It's just not making sense. So I think that maybe that's the optimism that's been coming from the trines with Neptune, where they're talking to people and checking in with people, and people just seem to think like, yeah, it's, you know, I believe it can be, it can get so much better. We're going to be fine. We're coming into the clear. But also we have seen that Venus has been moving retrograde as well through this part of the chart. Many of these transits have actually been taking place since December. So if we go back in time here, these conjunctions were really starting to heat up closer to December 15th, 2021. Now, at that point, Venus had already been in shadow for some time. Venus entered shadow somewhere around 11 degrees, so that was actually closer to mid-November. And if we look at this from November into December, Venus first made her conjunction with the moon and Pluto within a couple of degrees right around December 6th. And the very first transit Venus conjunct America's Pluto at 27 almost happened, but that's right where Mercury turned right where Venus turned retrograde. So Venus turned retrograde 1 degree short of Pluto. So it was like the rumbling was happening. I feel like if a planet stops short of something, it's almost like it's turning around going, hold on, let's try to save this. Let's try to work this out. Let's try to prevent this. And I spoke extensively in my last video that by the time December came around, they already knew that shit is hitting the fan. Now, Venus in this chart rules the 6th house, health, wellness. It can be the health of the country, whether or not the workforce is coming back, so on and so forth. It also deals with the 10th house, which deals with our relationships with businesses, whether or not people are actually going back to work, if they're feeling like they can pay their employees, because I could see the 10th house as the business in itself. So certainly people wanted to get back to work, but people may not have been well enough to work, or they had some concerns about whether or not they could actually afford to pay people because of whatever was going on. So whatever was going on in the news and the markets around February 21st-ish was the first inclination of what was coming. Then we saw Mercury show up and came into conjunction with Venus around the 28th, also bringing up more news revolving around breakdown or breakthrough. Mercury conjuncted our United States Pluto around the 30th. And then we saw a Mercury retrograde just short of Saturn in mid-January. And it's interesting because Mercury went retrograde in conjunction to the South Node. So this was January 20th. I'm assuming this materializes like this reworking of, well, we need to talk about it. Okay, you know, what's the process forward? At least the nice thing about the Mercury retrogrades this year is that they start in air signs, so it's really communicative. And they'll aspect Saturn in some way in Aquarius, and then they retrograde back into Earth signs, so we see physical change, and it'll trine or aspect Pluto. So something was also getting worked out here. You know, Mercury on the South Node is like, yeah, you know, things aren't looking so great. Maybe we're having some issues, at least politically, talking about pushing things through. I'm assuming this is just this realization also that the infrastructure deal was not going to work. Or that we were not going to see it kind of push through the way they had hoped it would. Mercury goes retrograde. It conjuncts America's Pluto again on January 27th, highlighting still lots of media. I kind of see this as like between the 2nd house and the 7th is like all the talking heads that are on the media networks being like, this is what you do with your money. Everything's going to be fine. This is where things are going. You know, we're solid. Mercury is still retrograde, and right now it's still in shadow, so a lot of these things aren't really going to start to kind of peak and really become more so clear until we're finished with the Venus-Mercury shadow, which is actually going to be closer to the end of February, the beginning of March. Nevertheless, that Mercury conjunction happened for the 2nd time on January 27th. My opinion is that this is a lot of like conversations that the Fed is having with the banking system. They're also talking about other larger global banking systems because Pluto rules America's 12th house. So some kind of dealing behind the scenes. Probably, I'm assuming the biggest thing that's going to come from some of these transits is whether or not there are breakout stories and exposés and things on politicians knowing that the shit's gonna hit the fan and making insider trades and deals, getting out of things, taking money, knowing that certain trades are going to be happening or lobbying for certain things, especially when it comes to either banking or agriculture because of certain legislation that's getting ready to be put in order. And how people respond to that. Because I can tell you that with some of the transits that are coming post this Pluto return, once we get into the spring of 2022 and we see Saturn, Mars, Venus, all come into conjunction and square the nodes, it's going to represent the new era, this new change, right? I also have said in previous videos that from my perspective, just looking at the astrology, because Pluto's at a 27, which is going to deal very specifically with tech, cars, computers, plugs, chips, any kind of technology. This is also an ongoing conversation that the US government is probably having with big tech. We think of like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all of these different social media platforms, Microsoft, Apple, knowing that they hold the keys to some of our most private data. Whether that's where we're shopping, how much we're spending, what countries we're buying from, how much money we have in a bank account, what credit cards we're using. There's some conversation that's going on here about access to our purchasing power and our resources and our money, and tracking that and logging that. Remember, because Pluto, it will be very obsessed over and control over what we have. So whether that's because they want to be able to get more money back in taxes, if they feel like people are kind of not being totally honest and paying as much as they could or they should, so they're going to go looking for it from people who are kind of cheating the system. Or they're also having conversations with big tech because they have realizations that some of the technologies that they're coming out with, 5G, facial recognition, chips, all kinds of things you can scan. We think of like digital passports, vaccine cards, all kinds of stuff. That is something that the US is going to want. And they may feel either threatened, or they may feel the need to want to work with big business to tax them because they know they can make money off of it, collaborate with them also, so that way they are going to have more access and more control to what we are doing with our money, our land, our businesses, or our bodies. So they're talking about this. That's what the chart says right now. They're talking about it. Venus goes direct around the end of January. We have Mercury that just recently went direct. And here we are getting ready to see Mercury come into conjunction with America's Pluto and transit Pluto. And also we're gearing up for the return. So this is where the transits actually begin for now what's coming. Now we look at Mercury coming into conjunction with Pluto. It's going to highlight once again this 7th house over here. And I watched the moon come into polarity with Mercury and Pluto right around February 13th. Now, there's a reason why I bring this date up. It's because I believe that's actually going to be the beginning process when we start to see some breakdown. Moon's going to conjunct Mercury. We've got Moon opposing all these Pluto-Mercury aspects. We're coming into what will be the full moon that's going to be happening actually in the sign of Leo on the 16th. And that may be when we first start kind of seeing signs of breakdown. Why? Venus is direct, Mercury is direct. These are lunar aspects it's receiving since that direct period. Also, we're going to be seeing both sextiles to the south node, and we're going to be seeing sextiles to Neptune. So this is like letting go, releasing, dissolving. Is it releasing information? Is it realizing that some of this stuff's going to get out? There's not much that they can do about it, perhaps. Something else that I spoke about a lot also was just Capricorn being energy that's associated with military, generals, anything relating to people wearing uniforms. So it can be everything from cops, and whether or not there was going to be huge movement with the police force and police deciding to wear more armor, more uniforms, covering their face with masks. I think of like stuff that I've seen in Canada where you had tons of police officers that were completely covering their face, not just wearing masks, but covering their face. Primarily probably because of concerns of just being recognized, especially because, you know, the second house can deal with the body. Sometimes it can deal with the face. And I wonder if there has just been a total shift and an awareness within the police task force, just knowing that there's some kind of takeover happening, or there's some kind of infiltration of the military or the government now giving them orders, telling them what to do, and they're realizing that they're losing control, right? Just a thought. Mercury's going to come into conjunction with our south node here. This will be on February 20th, right when we're gearing up for the Pluto return. I'll go to that chart in just a second. That's an interesting day to watch for because Mercury will be coming out of shadow, and when Mercury conjuncts the south node, obviously news can get out that there is some kind of loss. I'm also looking at it trine our natal Uranus at 8 degrees, so there is going to be some kind of financial or job-related news. I'm assuming that's going to show up. And then down the road, and I'll get to the chart in just a second, but down the road, we're going to see this buildup of energy at the end of February where Venus Mars and Pluto are all starting to align. And this will be on top of our natal Pluto return. Now, in this chart, Venus is ruled by the 6th house of health, wellness, workers, healthcare, and Mars is the ruler of the 12th house of unforeseen forces. Also the 5th house, specifically the 5th house, if we're looking at whole sign, that's going to deal with children, youth, creativity, artists, the list goes on. In a Placidus chart, this is the ruler of the 4th and the 5th. So some would assume, is this a war on youth? Is this a war on households, home? Is this a buildup or a beginning of what might start to feel like even a civil war? You know, I don't like to encourage that, but just going off what the transits are kind of saying, something is definitely kind of brewing here. Keep in mind that when all of these conjunctions are happening, there is also an opposition to our natal Mercury, okay? So as that's happening, it's also highlighting this right here, which is going to deal very specifically with our relationships with the media, our relationships with other people, with other countries, right? With what's getting out there. This is very much a relational house. And if this were a whole sign, Virgo would rule the 10th. So it coming into opposition also with the 7th is, you know, relationships with businesses, relationships out in the world, relationships perhaps even with other countries. But the real day that I'm watching is going to actually be, like I said, February 26th. And that'll be when the moon goes through Capricorn. We're also going to see that Venus and Mars are going to come into conjunction with Pluto as well. And that will be on March 2nd. So will something happen exactly on the Pluto return? I don't know. I'm anticipating that at the very least, something will be taking place at the end of February, beginning of March. I'm hoping it's not America realizing, oh shit, we're really in a pickle now. We don't have the resources any longer. Inflation's so bad. We can't just keep printing money. We need to change the way that we're handling resources because it's affecting not just us, but global markets. And we're starting to really see the depreciation of the dollar. Let's start a war, right? Mars, Pluto. Realize that Venus and Mars are being reborn together in this conjunction. So being that it's highlighting this 12th and 6th house axis, it's going to be also the topic of the fact that we don't have universal health care. Other countries do. This is not really aiding or assisting us in the process of actually thriving and being better. And we may actually start to feel like we're under attack by other countries because Mars rules the 12th house. Or we're going to war with another country, supporting a war, selling weapons relating to war, especially anything you can hold with your hands. Now, something I have seen recently is Biden has come out and spoken extensively about finally wanting to do something about what's going on with gun violence in America, wanting to get more involved with legislation and stuff that's going to crack down. I've said this before in my previous videos. If you had to ask me, you know, what do you think the number one thing is going to come about from the Pluto return? If I had to encapsulate it in one phrase, it would be, are we still going to use the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution? Are we still going to be running the country based off of some of these ideas, right? And I think very specifically about the rights to bear arms. And if the government's going to start cracking down and making it incredibly difficult for people to be able to do that, to purchase that, to have that purchasing power in the second house, but perhaps maybe even say that it's because materials need to go elsewhere or it's because of our protection. I mean, who knows what could happen? Certainly that was not something that was going to fly with the founding fathers, and that's definitely a big reason for why we had some of the conflicts we had. Other things as well. You know, I think of like taxation without representation. Like certainly taxes were a big reason revolving around America wanting to really kind of find independence from Britain and no longer feel like they were being squeezed and controlled and used purely just for resources. Remember that a return is always about a planet returning back home. So there's been a complete cycle. And it's almost like we're having to own up to the karma of how this country was founded. So if we think physically, if Pluto is death, 27 can be certain things relating to the death penalty, certain policies relating to that and how that's evolving and changing, our stances when it comes to like capital punishment or, you know, like I said, gun laws, anything like that. I think of like violence and brutality, and that we may actually see quite a bit of that within either military force or specifically with our police officers. Again, unfortunately, I don't like saying that, but it reminds me a lot of when we were seeing all of those conjunctions between Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter in Capricorn. You know, the later the degrees are in Capricorn, the more it rules with an iron fist. It wants to put up the walls, it wants to put up the gates, it wants to fully define borders, it wants to really make sure that you cannot penetrate something, you can't penetrate the walls, right? But Pluto has X-ray vision. So it doesn't matter what barriers we try to put up, because of this return, it's all going to get unearthed. We're gonna see things come up from the depths that we were not expecting. And I'm not just talking about sex scandals. I'm talking about awareness that is going to come out through possibly leaked documents, spies, espionage stuff, where we're actually seeing where the US government is really making money, running this country almost as a business, and we are the people who are basically being sold into this whole process. So we've gotten stuck in the system. My concern is that as this starts erupting, I think that they're going to come back with force, because the Pluto return now is going to be peppered with a Mars and Venus conjunction. So that is going to hang tight until the next Pluto return, guys. That's how long it's going to be. So we talked a little bit about the Venus retrograde, the Mercury retrograde. Something else that's happened since the last time I did a video is now the North Node is in Taurus. North Node is in Taurus is highlighting Venus. So it's going to highlight anything from values, money, resources, banking, food, all of that Taurus stuff, and all these planets that are making trines to the North Node. So clearly there's something being moved around, reorganized in regards to this new workforce that's coming, the money that's being put into or invested into or manipulated to maybe get things back on track. So I think of like manipulated or orchestrated dips in the market and other things that are going to be coming in order to be able to kind of clear or cancel things out. I don't know if that's going to be possible, but I would not put it past those energies personally. But where the North Node is, like I said, guys, higher prices, more wanting to kind of grab things, take things, collect things, hold on to things. It's hanging out in the 6th house. You know, according to this chart, it's not going to be there very long. We're going to see the North Node actually dip into the 5th house once it hits 22 degrees. That's looking sometime in April. Maybe April? No, yeah, late April, early May. So it's only going to be there until then. But I'm wondering, with all of the trines from the 2nd house to the 6th house, it's what foods can restaurants get? Are we going to see a return of like restaurants coming back? Hospitality, hotels, anything relating to the service industry, especially beauty industry. I have a feeling that there's going to be new rules and regulations coming revolving around max capacity of people in a restaurant, revolving around kind of like laws revolving around cleanliness, maybe in like spas, hotels. I think of like people who like cut hair or might be in the beauty or the service industry. So that might be something that's coming as well. And the farmers and all the people who are making food, growing food, anything like that, they may start getting hit with new regulations or taxes as well because of those trines. Now, in the midst to all of this, Pluto is also in a trine to the North Node. So Pluto is about control, ruler of the 12th house, and a trine to the North Node in the 6th. Where are our markets, our agriculture, our food, our service industry possibly being controlled by either a shadow government or possibly by the government or being manipulated by the government behind closed doors? I think of like, because Pluto is about fear, where everything that's happening right now is actually to have fear of scarcity. So we're seeing the shortages and the limitations. God bless those truckers that are doing their thing out there, trying to really drive home a point that somebody's got to stand up for their freedom. But I also feel like there can be some manipulation in this process where they knew that people were going to push back and kind of stand back. And can this backfire? And can we actually find that some of these transits with Mars, Venus, and Pluto conjuncting in Capricorn is the government coming in going, you know what, we're going to start getting involved in the routes. We're going to get the stuff moved. People need to get their things. We're going to start kind of getting involved now in actually making sure that goods are getting to where they need to go. The same way they're doing that with some educational jobs, the same way they've done that this past year or two when it came to vaccinations, and we saw all kinds of people in uniform coming out and rolling out and being involved in vaccinations. It's a little weird. I feel like we're going to find that there are going to be certain places or certain states that are going to feel like police states, or they're going to feel heavily monitored or heavily regulated, and it's going to feel limiting to some extent. All right, so let's look at the Pluto return chart. I don't remember if I looked at that specifically, but we're going to do that now. And something that I will do is I'm going to lay the US natal over it. I just want to kind of assess more of the Pluto return. So this will be happening on February 20th, 2022 at 2:28 p.m. Eastern time. Like I said, will something happen that day? I don't know. Remember, guys, this is a return that's going to last, I think, for like 240 something odd years. So it can take time for this to really evolve. It's not going to be something that's going to happen overnight. It's not like a lunar return or a solar return. So this is going to give us a Cancer rising at 24 degrees. Automatically, my mind is already like, oh, that's our Mercury. So best believe we're going to be in the news somehow. 24 degrees Cancer rising is a very Piscean energy. So it's going to feel like this dissolving or this kind of washing away or clearing through something private or something that's hidden in general. This is a chart that's going to be ruled by the moon. So we really want to look at aspects specifically to the moon. The moon is in Libra in the 4th house. Notice that in this chart, the moon is at a critical 22 degrees. It's in a square to the ascendant. So it's pressure relating between the home, Cancer, 4th house moon. And it's also squaring Pluto on the descendant. That's a moon square Pluto. That's some very emotional intensity revolving around whether or not we feel safe or we feel secure in our homes. Okay? Whether this is here in America, whether this is with the housing market in general, whether we're going to start actually seeing this materialize as the conflict and the actual kind of like revolution is taking place in the American home, where you've got families divided, you know, husbands and wives that are different political views, people arguing about vaccination status, people arguing about, you know, how we can fix the country. What if the actual issue revolving around this Pluto return is being orchestrated because it's this breakdown of families, of unions, of coming together, bringing people together? I mean, it's been a long time since I've been in history class, but I think that some of my biggest takeaways learning about the American Revolution was the fact that it was about people banding together, right? So we saw people banding together. We saw people riding out in the middle of the night to go and meet with other people, to pass on letters and messages, and to organize militias, and to be able to help people who are wounded and house soldiers and keep pushing through until we had the birth of our nation. This ain't looking like that. This is looking like, to me, with the moon in a square to Pluto and it being the chart ruler, that there's something that's going to go on government-wise that is going to start creating strife in relation to our relationships with them and home and property or family values. And I've said all along, like, to me, this has kind of felt like the government's now breaking down the American dream. It's already bad enough that most of us can't really afford to own homes or pay off our debt or be able to feel free, right? We feel almost like a slave to the system. But now I think it's going to start really breaking down this idea of the nuclear family, being married, having kids, taking care of parents, being with them. And it's this very emotionally kind of charged power struggle. Those of you guys who have ever gone through a moon square Pluto, or if you have it natally, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I find it particularly lethal when it's a T square that's missing Aries. And there's one thing I know is that in this next year, We're still going to see Eris go through Aries. We're going to see Jupiter go through Aries briefly in 2022, more so next year. And then the nodes are actually going to start squaring in on Pluto, and they will move to the 29 of Libra and Aries when they next shift, and it will still square Pluto and Capricorn. So there's more change coming. I mean, you could really look at these charts clear until like 2026, 2027, when we're coming into our Uranus return, and you're really going to see like revolutionary energy happen then. This year, next year, it's more the breakdown that's leading to our Uranus return. But for right now, Moon in the 4th is happy. Moon in Libra, certainly reflecting on emotions, relationships, our relationships with people at home, and if we still feel safe. And then the square to Pluto at a 27 and the square to the descendant is this breakdown of the relationship, maybe even between state and federal. So I think of maybe like, this can be like more local governments, maybe not really getting on well and handling things well when it comes to home property, resources within their immediate environment, and what's going on federally. There's some friction. I also look at the fact that we have the sun in Pisces and it's sitting in the 8th house. So sun in the 8th house is not necessarily bad. I mean, it does have a difficult time shining because it does want to be seen, but it's kind of like in the shadows when it's in the 8th house. So we have the 2nd house ruler, the sun, which is usually very powerful if it's in the 2nd house, it's earning potential, now move into the 8th of other people's monies, other people's resources. At a 2, it's a Taurus degree. So there's something kind of suspicious, kind of sneaky going on here, revolving around possibly insurance, death, anything involving health and wellness and what that costs, you know, whether that's emotionally, spiritually, or financially. But the 2nd house sun being in the 8th is going to be a lot of like us dealing with debt, what we owe, handling it, kind of looking at it, and really starting to get to the bottom of it. Now, this is an out of sign square, but I noticed that this is only about 5 degrees away from an exact square to the nodes. Okay, so we have the nodes in financial signs, North Node in Taurus, wealth, South Node in Scorpio, the breakdown, the letting go of debt and issues revolving around scarcity. So with the sun here, we have to kind of reconcile with this square and let go of perhaps maybe careless excess spending, spending that's gone into things that are more recreational. I wonder if we're going to start to lose opportunities to have tax breaks on things revolving around losses, you know, that we have accumulated financially. Like if you have a business and you had a loss, you can write that stuff off. If you're in the business of entertainment and you entertain for a living and you got to travel, or you want to write off vacations, or you want to be able to take your clients golfing, like we may start to lose that stuff. We might lose all of the extras that are coming from that South Node in the 5th house. I can't help but notice that this is in the 5th house, which deals with children and reproductive stuff, especially reproductive health. Ruled by Mars, and it's in a conjunction to Venus. Perhaps maybe that's one of the saving graces, is that we've got the North Node ruler and the South Node ruler in a conjunction, and it's in a house that deals very specifically with health, healing, and it's in a trine. It's a loose trine to Uranus. So I'm hoping that it materializes as like generating more jobs, putting more people in the workforce, anything revolving around support with health and wellness. It may come about, but I'm not totally optimistic, because the very first aspect that this moon is actually going to be making will be the square actually to Mars, Venus, and Pluto. So it's a little past the Mars and Venus. It's conjunct. I guess the first one would be Pluto. So we may start losing certain resources revolving around what the government may consider to be not necessity. So sexual, reproductive, anything revolving around, are we going to be, you know, doing maternity leave? Are we going to be focusing on putting more money into sexual health education? Are we going to be supporting certain entities like Planned Parenthood? Probably not, actually. We're probably going to see that that's going to lose power to an extent. In this chart also, another thing we see is Chiron on an angle representing some kind of wounding, especially revolving around our identity. You know, the 10th house in the midheaven is very seen. So one may suggest that with Chiron being there, especially with that being still in a square slightly to the Mars and Venus aspects, that part of our breakdown in our stability when it comes to work and career stuff is the fact that individuals don't have what they need. They don't have the resources that they need, whether it comes to issues with taxes, with funding, with getting support, with just being allowed to even open businesses. That's going to be kind of like a breakdown, so to say. We've got Jupiter and Neptune in the 9th. I'm liking the trine from Neptune to the South Node. I do feel like that's going to be interesting because in a way other countries may lead by example. So our relationship with other countries coming in and talking about, you know, what they would want to do to kind of shine a light on what's wrong with the United States or what the United States needs to be better about or with, especially because Jupiter rules health and wellness. Expect this to be a total shit show when it comes to social justice, though. I'm assuming that with Jupiter at an 11 and Neptune at a 22, that makes me feel like there's going to be some major issues because this moon in conjunct to Neptune suggests that the public is not feeling like we're getting total honesty or clarity revolving around the justice system, judges, anything relating to legal stuff. I'm interested because this also makes that sextile to Pluto, that there's still a lot of things that are not being addressed. You know, I've said this in a previous video, but it's like a lot of the Pluto return is going to also revolve around our karma with blood being spilled on our soil. And I don't just mean America. America has been involved with so many wars, really for quite some time now, whether it's funding it or getting involved because it's going to actually positively affect us and we're going to make money off of it, that a lot of the Pluto return is us owning up to that. A lot of the Pluto return is also about us owning up to slavery and the fact that this country was founded on bringing slaves to this country, taking land from Native Americans, not really doing much to help them. I mean, we've got massive amount of people on reservations that are sick and dying. They have poor health care. They're not given the necessity they need. Just giving them some money and sending them to school is not okay. We have got massive issues with suicides, overdoses, drinking problems, issues with diabetes. It's not even funny. And we've also got a whole slew of people who, on a spiritual, emotional, generational sense, when I'm talking about African Americans, they've been taken from their homeland and they weren't given really anything other than some of them were given freedom and were given a plot of land and a mule. That's it. So, you know, 200 and something odd years later, we're still dealing with the effects of that culture that had never really been treated as an equal, never really being given the same opportunities across the board. I mean, whether you're looking at going as far back as what happened post-slavery to also looking at what took place also during the Civil War and how they were treated then, looking at what was happening with segregation, with voting rights. I mean, like, the list goes on. And just because we've come into a modern age and we say, oh, well, you know, now we're woke and we're more aware because of what happened with Black Lives Matter. Don't get me started on that. But that suddenly it's like, it's okay, everybody's equal. It's really not. And that's not making up for a lot of the things that have happened over the period of time since this country was founded. I'll just leave it at that. So there's more of this that's going to be coming up. And I think perhaps maybe it's going to be interesting to see how Americans all realize that we're all being cooked and that it's not really about who's black or white or man or woman or this or that. It's about who has power and who has money and who is actually influencing what's going on here in politics in America and where the money is versus everybody else who's kind of getting screwed and getting left on the sidelines. So I think we're going to look a lot at wealth. I think we're going to look a lot at wealth, the psychological and the emotional effects of what's been going on with our lack of funding, lack of resources. I'm wondering where this money is going to come from. Sorry, you guys noticed that my chart changed. When it gets late, my color scheme shifts a little bit, but that's okay. So we've got this trine though from Pluto and the North Node. And my concern is that Pluto rules the South Node. So is that a weakening of the self-employed? Is that a weakening of the entertainers? Is that a weakening of youth and younger people? Let's hope not, because they are the future. And then let's go ahead and, I guess one other thing would be Saturn. You know, we do have Saturn sitting here. That's on the cusp of the 8th house. Technically, it's in the 8th. The moon's receiving a trine slightly from Saturn, so that's at least a little bit stabilizing when it comes to, I think, knowing that America is going to at least stay intact for now. I'm interested to see what happens more when Aries, when Saturn and Neptune go into Aries in a number of years. So here's something that I like to do. I like to throw a natal chart and flip it back and forth. So right here we have America's Pluto return, the first one. And here on the outside we have the United States chart. So notice that it moves America's Mercury that I was kind of focusing on, that Mercury retrograde. Pluto's been opposed that, all these planets are opposing that. It moves Mercury to the ascendant. So let's flip this. So what does that materialize? Is that going to be like an informant? Is that going to be a leak? Is that going to be something that comes out? We've got Mercury and the point of fortune sitting on the ascendant. So it's like America's, there's something about America being on the news and that really kind of coming front and center in a very big way. Equally, we've also got the South Node in transit, which we've been seeing conjunct America's Mercury. A lot of mercurial stuff, business, money, transactions, trading, news, things like that. We've got Venus conjunct Lilith in the 12th. So that's our natal Venus. That's usually in the 7th and the 12th. Female sex scandals, scandals revolving around mothers, prominent women in American society, perhaps something revolving around a girl or a woman working maybe with another country or going missing or relaying some kind of information to people elsewhere. We notice also that Saturn is relatively close to this moon. So usually this is in the 10th house. So America's 10th house moves to the 4th. America's 7th and 8th moves to the ascendant. So it's kind of flippy floppy. And the moon is coming into a conjunction with the sun. So that does kind of make me feel like it is the opportunity for a complete new beginning, because it would be kind of looked at almost like a new moon. That happening in the 8th house can just represent like a restart when it comes to resources, you know? It's a bit of a mess right now though, guys. We're also experiencing transit Neptune in opposition to our natal Neptune, and it's in a square to Mars. And if we look at this, it's actually happening in the axis of what would be the whole sign 4th house, Pisces, home, being limited at home. People are at home, they're drinking, they're depressed, they're stuck, there's a virus, all Pisces things. In opposition to Virgo in Neptune and Virgo in the 9th. For me, that's like screaming with the squares to Mars. Like, we have no business putting some of these people who are specialists about viruses or health or wellness, who are making big decisions about our health out in the media, okay, or in politics. It's like, I'm hoping that we realize in the midst of this Neptune opposed Neptune that we don't really know a lot about what's gone on health-wise with this virus. There's lots of things that we still have to find out. I think some of the scarier effects are how it's been affecting people emotionally and psychologically more than anything with that opposition, and that it's created a whole slew of individuals who are literally afraid to leave their home, afraid to not wear a mask, they're afraid to be around their family, their neighbors, and it's also really affected the educational systems. You know, we've got a bunch of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old kids that are in such prime time when they should be socializing and interacting with other kids and developing those social skills, and they're not, because they've been staying home, they've been with parents, they've been with family. So I'm wondering what the implications are going to be in terms of society psychologically, right? Looking at that, you know, Sun in the 8th house and Jupiter and Neptune, 6th house ruler, Jupiter, Neptune, 8th house ruler. What is this teaching us about the effects that it's actually having on us psychologically, and how that's affecting the cleanup of that, and that we don't just need healthcare. Healthcare is not limited to just seeing a specialist or seeing a general doctor. We need assistance with addiction. We need assistance and resources for depression, for people who are also suicidal, for people who are misplaced out of jobs, for people who are homeless. Like, healthcare is such a bigger thing than I think what we're really aware of. And perhaps maybe this crisis is going to bring this on. Now, I don't ever look at an 8th house sun without going, well, there's a little bit of death and regeneration and loss that's happening. I noticed that America's series, which is usually in our 3rd house, relatively close to the moon, is coming into conjunction with the sun and also with Jupiter. So it's sitting on that 8th, 9th house cusp. So that's definitely about death, suicide, depression, anything revolving around illness. And perhaps maybe part of America's karma is this clearing and actually seeing that people are going to die. People are going to not choose death, that's not what I'm saying, but they're going to die or go through some kind of death or regenerative period because of a spiritual crisis or because of a financial crisis. I'm not wild about all that stuff that's like 7th house that lands in the 12th, because it makes me feel like people who we may have felt like our allies turn out not to be. This has me a little concerned also with the moon square Pluto, just revolving around a relationship with government figures and the control that they have over our home and property taxes, home taxes, what we can own, because I feel like that's a little concerning as well. So let's also pull up something else I wanted to look at was the solar return this year. So this is going to be, technically the solar return will be on January 5th, 2022. And this is going to give us a Gemini rising ruled by Mercury. Notice the Mercury themes. America's Mercury in the 8th moves to the ascendant. And now we've also got a solar return with Mercury on the ascendant, Mercury in Cancer. So Mercury is communicating, expressing emotions, our feelings, what's going on with our home, our real estate, our families, our children, our properties. Mercury on the ascendant is very strong, and Cancer is very emotional. It's in an exact sextile to Mars, so there's going to be lots of motivation to sharing, getting out of our house, talking to people, kind of like organizing maybe to an extent. Sun in the 1st house is very active, can't be missed. It's very loud, it's very communicative, it's very protective, right? Especially when it's the ruler of the 3rd. Talking more, traveling more, interacting with neighbors more, things like that. But I think the big thing that we want to look at is Mercury, and it's got some pretty strong aspects, being with a square to Jupiter, a sextile to Mars. It is almost in a square to the moon. So this is a 4th house moon again. So we saw it in the Pluto return. We're seeing it in the solar return. Can one suggest that this is going to be another year of spending more time at home? Possibly. And then the moon is in opposition to Neptune. This is the general public, the emotional kind of thing that's going on in the world. So with the moon being here, 2nd house, 4th house, a lot of people are still going to be working from home. We're still going to see an extended period of people working from home. That's not going to change. That may be the new normal. Then we've got the moon that's in an opposition to Neptune, ruler of the 10th house. That makes me feel like people still don't know what direction we're going in. This may continue to be a situation where to some extent there is some social distancing or some working from home, staying from home, especially with the square to the ascendant. Could be as long as summer of 2023. You know, it could take that long just looking at these aspects. Lilith in opposition to Pluto, money, resources, emotional security, how we're really tied to that the home is symbolic of our security. And as it stands in opposition to Pluto is the breakdown revolving around, is that really secure or safe? And Pluto trine the North Node and Uranus are coming into conjunction in the 12th house. At the end of July, early August is when the North Node Uranus conjunction will be exact, about 18 degrees, if I remember correctly. So that's hidden, being that it's in the 12th house, and it's like, what's hidden is that there's going to be probably lots of other countries coming in as America's tanking, wanting to buy into companies and buy stuff up, properties, whatever, knowing that the ship is sinking. So we may start to see certain other countries get really heavily vested in America, because it's going to be like everything's on sale. You know, I don't like saying that, but it's kind of the feeling that I'm getting. Comparing this to the United States chart in general, notice that Mars is relatively close to the ascendant. We have Venus and Jupiter and the Sun on the ascendant, so it moves from the 7th to the 1st. So that's positive. We do have some people that come and show up and go to bat for us. Not wild about the Neptune opposed Neptune or the Moon conjunct Neptune. That makes me feel like at least clear until the better part of at least this fall, we may still be dealing with issues revolving around limitations, perhaps maybe because of what's going on with COVID or the aftermath of COVID. And North Node in the 2nd, South Node in the 8th. More kind of economic challenges and breakdown, especially at the end of this year. I think it's really referencing actually the final Pluto return, because there's 3. There's one that happens in February, one that's going to happen, it's a retrograde over the summer, and one that'll go direct in December. So it's going to take some time to play out. I'm also just noticing that this Vesta-Uranus conjunction, because that's technically happening from, 5th, some people would say whole sign 6th, into the 12th, is also just perhaps foreign investment or involvement or kind of infiltrating the agricultural game here in the United States. We've also got the U.S. moon conjunct the midheaven. Notice that 2 degrees is also the same degree as our Pluto return. See, I want to make sure I have this right. As the Pluto return chart, Sun. Did I do that right? Oh no, it's supposed to be the other way around. Sorry, guys. I mean, you get what I'm saying, though. It was right at 8 or right at 2. It was right around there somewhere. All right, so I want to make the most of time. Let me get into, before we finish, I just want to show you the other 2 Pluto return charts. That's going to be one this summer. So we've got the retrograde will be July 11th, 2022, and then it'll go direct December 28th. So let's look at July 11th really quick. So remember, it's retrograding. So it's basically saying now we review all of the Plutonian themes that have happened since February. So this will be in July. So Scorpio rising, South Node on the ascendant, release and letting go, going through changes, detaching. North Node, Uranus in the 7th house. And we've got Saturn conjunct the IC. Those of you guys who are Scorpio risings, you're really going to resonate with this, because I've seen this a lot for Scorpio risings in the last year or so. Just Saturn going through your 4th, feeling kind of restricted, lots of obligation with home and family. And then Uranus going into the 7th is just like a partner or some kind of something erratic with people moving in and out of your house or staying with you and going somewhere else or picking up and moving across the country. I'm predicting from this chart now, this is the first I've seen it. This makes me feel like you're going to have a lot of people that are like, I'm leaving the United States. I'm not staying here. I also feel, because Saturn is like a anchor at the bottom of the chart, it's also suggesting that there can be some huge lockdowns within certain neighborhoods or cities, or it's harder going from state to state or actually traveling, perhaps with documents, issues revolving around cars, perhaps. And Saturn in a pretty tight square with the nodes. It is the traditional ruler of the 4th. It's squaring the modern day ruler of the 4th, people picking up and going somewhere else. So I think we're going to see lots of people either wanting to leave the States or wanting to actually migrate and go to other areas. But Saturn makes it feel very restricted. Those of you guys who have had Saturn go through the most southern part of your chart, you get what I'm saying. It's like you feel like there's nowhere to go. So people who are here, it might be harder to get around. People who are not from here, it might be harder to get into the country, or it might be harder to get out. Okay? We've got an 8th house sun in this Pluto return as well. So it's really heavily keeping us in that 8th house axis, not letting us break out of the fear, especially revolving around emotional security, resources, and home. To me, I feel like this is when the shit starts to hit the fan with the housing market, because you see all of the oppositions between the government access and anything relating to that. And Mars is the ruler. Mars is in Taurus, so it does not do so well in that sign. And Mars is starting to come into a square with Pluto. That does not make me feel so great. I think there's going to be lots of conflicts with people in the streets. I think there's going to be lots of conflicts with neighbors. I think that this is really when freedom of speech is starting to really be threatened. Some kind of crackdown or limitation, especially when it comes to how we communicate, shows, podcasts, stuff like that, and how much control politics or the government may have in like our freedom of speech. Pluto in opposition to Ceres conjunct the sun is also highlighting the fact that there is like a wave of death, debt, regeneration, things that are clearing. Looking at this chart, there's a lot of conjunctions to America's natal chart, like a lot. The moon sits on the ascendant. We've got MC on the 8th house cusp. Ceres conjunct the point of fortune and Mercury. So I think depression and issues revolving around home and being stuck in the home, or issues revolving around feeling safe or nurtured, are going to come up. We've got Venus conjunct Mars, which is pretty passionate, but in the 7th house square Neptune is what is the purpose? Are we speaking with clarity, or do we have the facts straight, so on and so forth? Also, I should note that America is coming into their Chiron return. It hasn't happened yet, but they are coming into it in this chart. And the moon is conjunct Saturn, which is usually America's 3rd house, and it's happening in the 3rd house. Are we going to have a lot of people having to live with others? Are we going to see families of 4, 5, 6 living in a 2-bedroom apartment? Are we going to see people who are buying land and buildings and homes together because it's safer or it's more secure? I don't know. And then let's look at the last Pluto return. And this will be February 28th, 2022. This will be direct. I'll do another video. I want to wait until some of this stuff starts to happen. So as we get closer to the summer, I'll do a part 3. So don't worry about that. People are going to be like, what's going to happen? I got to make the predictions and try to do it out as far as I can so I'm not affected by what I'm seeing in the news. This one's a little bit rockier because it almost seems like each one, it's like more restriction, more restriction, more restriction, right? It went from like, you know, what we were seeing in the first one to the IC, and now Saturn's on the ascendant. So maybe just a slow period of just the US economy and freedom, just people becoming less optimistic, I guess I would say. More rebellious, less optimistic. Aquarius rising, Saturn on the ascendant, that's pretty strongly committed to rebellion. You would think Saturn is like holding back, but Saturn on the ascendant in Aquarius is like holding true to the values. It's like, no, fuck the system. No, I'm going to go my own way. Especially because it's just now starting to come out of the Saturn-Uranus squares. They're going to be very strong in the fall of 2022. But Uranus in this chart sits very close to the North Node, still in a square to Saturn. It is in a sextile to Neptune, so I do feel like that's helping kind of aid us into where we're going in the future, but it's more how we're starting over in 2023. We see the sun in Capricorn in the 11th, so that can represent like new government branches, new people of service. There's probably going to be new I think services, social services is kind of the feeling that I'm getting, because that deals with like servicing people out of 6. The sun rules the 7th house. So do we have new enemies? Do we have new supporters? Have we aligned with new countries? Or are we seeing that there is more of an alignment between parties, or is there a new party altogether? Interesting that we've got Pluto, Mercury, and Venus all conjunct here. Guys, same conjunction that was happening at the end of December of 2021. Same conjunction. We will also have a Mercury retrograde in Capricorn at the beginning of 2023. So keep in mind that Mercury will go retrograde through here. So there's still something that they're working on and kind of breaking down. I guess my concern with this chart is the moon Neptune, because that makes me feel like there is still a lot of, well, what does the youth do? What do the younger people do? What do women do? What's going on with reproductive health? What's going on with the children and issues revolving around children being cared for, right? That seems to be like a reoccurring cause. Vesta, moon, Neptune, seeing all of that conjunct in the first house, technically it would be second, is like, are we feeding the needy? Are we helping those who are homeless? Are we giving to the children? Are we going to see larger numbers of kids that are going to be not cared for, right? Issues with not just housing, but I think of like food, because that's a very second house energy. And that Venus, Mercury, Pluto is kind of aligning the 8th house, the 9th house, and also the 4th house in the 12th, which is hidden. Like, it's still saying there's some kind of back top secret meetings that are going on at the end of this year about some kind of segue into aligning or seeing that we're doing more business with other countries, whether that's other countries buying us out or just the fact that we're sending some of our work or some of our stuff out to other places, right? Mars retrograde on the IC. I'm not wild about that because this is the Pluto return that's going to stick. Each one is the buildup until finally what we see happen. So even though there is like this wanting to break out energy, Saturn is still in a square to Uranus. So they're trying to restrict people from rebelling, reacting, seeking freedom, pushing back. And Mars is retrograde here on the most southern part of the chart. That's not something that you want to mess with, especially with the square to Neptune and the moon. That makes me feel more like this is us, like, okay, you know, are we at war with other countries or are we at war with ourselves? Are we being distracted with what's going on in other countries purely because, you know, we actually have infiltration coming into our country? That's hard to say. Comparing that to the US chart, it does move the US moon in Aquarius to the ascendant with Pallas. So that's like really fighting for freedom and fighting for equality, right? Equality, freedom, I think of like Pallas. And paying better attention to the patterns, people following their instincts more, listening to their instincts when it's like, no, it's time to move or it's time to go or anything relating to that. We've got the US Sun, Jupiter, Venus moving into the 5th. And we've got US Uranus conjunct Mars on the IC. See, that makes me feel like, I don't know, like saying this, but like the possibility of conflict that arises is some kind of an invasion. And it is, does it mean that the conflict is not necessarily like war? Maybe, but could it be that we're having other countries' military on our soil? Is there a situation where there is some redirection in media and how we are being, how we're telling Americans that what we're involved in, you know, in another country, if it is anything related to war, is being warped or manipulated because it's in a square to the moon and Neptune. So it's a lot of like, yeah, the US is great. They went over there and they helped with so-and-so. And then only to find out that it's not really what the US is doing. There's something off there about the direction when it comes to having certain countries on other people's soils and whether or not they're stirring the pot, if they're actually helping, right? I don't know, just between that and the Neptune opposed Neptune, square Mars, it's probably people really benefiting. I don't like saying people should, but people benefiting from really using common sense and learning to be more logical when it's about rationalizing what really is happening. Like I've seen these squares, or I've perceived this square between Neptune, opposed Neptune, square America's Mars, more as like a situation where we're being brainwashed. We're being brainwashed. And the media is brainwashing us because it's in the 9th and in the 3rd house with believing everything we see on the news or on the TV, especially when it comes to health and wellness or anything relating to Neptune. Is it actually affecting our mental health negatively? And is it causing us to be more aggressive, more argumentative, and kind of getting lost in translation? because I think there's more of that coming with some of the Jupiter transits that are going to be taking place. I mean, there's no doubt. This is something that's going to be lighting up pretty much as early as the end of March. So by the time a lot of these energies are already underway, are they spinning it and manipulating it? You know, do we not really find out how bad things are until America comes into the Mars retrograde that's going to happen in the fall of 2022? And we're going to see Mars square Jupiter and also Neptune in the 3rd, and also square Neptune. It's like maybe then we start to see the story unravel. Maybe then we start to kind of realize that there's more going on than what we were aware of, and that we're not really at war with other people. Other people are orchestrating this, so we're at war with ourselves, with our neighbors, with our family, and letting the whole thing kind of erupt. I think we're going to see a lot of the micro affect the macro across the board. I will be back. I will be back. I will probably wait and see how this settles for a couple of months and do something closer to the next Pluto return, because I have a feeling you guys are definitely going to see a lot of this stuff play out. I will tell you that in my next video, I'll go deeper into it because I've spent a lot of time doing this one. Now, when America is getting closer to their Uranus return, and this is going to be 2027. Yeah, 2027 going into 2028. This is when we're actually, I think, going to see some of the real kind of chaotic breakdown really begin to happen. Because it's the ruler of our moon, which has a lot to do with our fate and our resources, the 8th house. And the housing market. But also at that point in time, Pluto will be also conjunct and retrograding over our South Node. And America will be experiencing the reverse nodal return. So really, the Pluto return serves more so as the breakdown over the next 2 years of resources, power, control, big business, possibly affecting whether or not we continue with physical money, possibly there being all kinds of changes and innovations in our food and how we're eating and feeding our bodies. And it's still going to be another 4 years before we're really seeing which way this is going to fall. I personally, I try to stay optimistic. I try to stay positive, but I've had this feeling all along that the United States may ultimately become something like separate territories, where it may not be the United States at some point closer to 2030. I've seen it psychically. I've seen it in dreams. It almost looks something like more like Hunger Games. Not to scare you, but where there will be separate districts or territories, where it might be states that band together. They might be more kind of functioning almost like how Europe has all the separate countries within Europe. Something like that is kind of how I've seen it. And it's going to be broken down depending on where things kind of lie, not economically, but environmentally. And how the U.S. kind of starts to shift regarding environmental factors and things with water and resources. And I think that the North Node in Gemini was just getting people to kind of venture out more so they can see what else is out there. Because the United States is a huge country. It's not just made up of like New York and Miami and Chicago and LA and Seattle. There's everything in between. So people are starting to kind of move around. So as we get closer to 2026, 2027, this is when the real changes are really going to be happening. So don't just assume, oh, it's the Pluto return, we're going to be great, you know, within a month and everything's good as new. No. Pluto is going to swing several times. Likely the bigger swing is actually going to be the one that's taking place in July. So we want to see what's going to happen around that solar return and that second Pluto return when it retrogrades. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I know it was a lot. It was kind of astro heady and nerdy, but definitely some stuff that is food for thought and just more my interpretation, just looking at the astrology. Obviously, there's tons of people out there talking about the Pluto return, how that may manifest and what might come about. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think is going to happen? What have you already started seeing being kind of playing out in the US news, or your interpretations of some of the transits? I would really love to know your guys' thoughts. Feel free to leave your comments below. And I will be back and probably do a part 3, but I want to wait until we get closer to the summer to see what kind of happens. As always, thank you guys for watching, liking, sharing, and subscribing, and I will see all of you very soon. Take care.